Good morning, everybody, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, both to our audience here in person on the 46th floor of the NZ building, where the investment center of the Victorian government is, and also warm welcome to our online participants, over 70 odd of them. Very warm welcome on this auspicious day, and weather in Melbourne is looking good. Well, because we have got a very tight schedule today, so I'm delighted that we have such a diverse audience. You can't see it. Yes, please, can I ask everyone online to turn your voice and mute it, please, so that there's no disturbances from dogs and other domestic or office ongoing. So I would like to oh yeah, that's just yeah. So I introduced myself as an MC and moderator today. The MC was originally to the Virginia Bureau, but she's not feeling well, but she's online, I think, now, so I'll do it. And of course, Virginia is the CEO of the Victorian branch of ACBC. I'm Monkit Tam, and I'm by day an academic, and my role in the ACBC for the last few years has been Vice President.
Download, it's not coming.
We could not meet in person, so this is the first time since COVID we meet in person, and I'm really happy that we have such a enthusiastic response to this event and coming. And of course, I also want to express my gratitude to some of our speakers who have been staunch supporters of our event for many years. So thank you for their organization as well. Of course, people change. Let me begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri territory people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today and online. And some quick housekeeping. I think I will ask everyone to mute until we have start the Q&A. And question could be from the room here in person or online using the Q&A box. And we'll start by having our key speaker, four of us to speak. For each one of them speak for about 7 minutes or so, and after they are finished, then we open up for Q&A. And I think we have a very really experienced with deep understanding of what's going on at the front line of international education that facing Australia and particularly Victoria. So we are fortunate really to have such expertise and experience and people to share their insight with us. So perhaps without further ado, I would now want to introduce our first speaker, Melissa Banks. She is the head of International Education Center of Excellence at Austrade. Melissa.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you, ACBC, for inviting us to join you here today. It's very nice to see live faces. Just a bit of a reminder of Austrade's role in international education. We are responsible for the global marketing and promotion of Australian education. The other responsibility is to build the capacity of Australian education providers for your export success. So hopefully, yes, good. Melissa Banks is my name. I head up the International Education Centre of Excellence in Austrade. So really delighted to join you here today. And please, I beg your indulgence, I may be more than 7 minutes, but I think it's worth it because I've actually got some really hot off the press insights to share with you. So here we go. So we all know the international education sector was deeply impacted by border closures. In 2019, that was the peak for our export sector, with revenue generated around $40.4 billion. Export earnings then fell by 37% to $22.5 billion by the end of 2021. Interestingly, conversely, correspondence courses, that's the term used by ABS, those exports increased by about 70% over that same period, from 9 million to 5 billion. And so that's obviously reflecting the increase in online learning overseas, and you'll hear more about that later. But the impact has not been even. Obviously, ALICOS, non-award and school sectors were hit particularly hard. The next speaker, Phil Honeywood, will speak to the current situation concerning student visas and returns data. These are lag indicators. Today, I want to talk about lead indicators. The chart on the top left, yes, shows demand data from IDP Connect from China. This tells us about the search behaviour of students who are looking to go abroad or are or have been researching their options. The time frame is 2 years. Key observations here is that Australia has traditionally been the third most popular study destination for Chinese students. This remains the case. The US has gained share of search, while the UK is losing share. And when looking at search volume, in aggregate, demand for postgraduate studies has declined by about 30% over this time frame. I think that's an important observation. Looking at the chart on the right, Austrade has teamed up with study portals and produced some regional insights reports. Again, the reports measure interest, not enrolments, but provide insights into the interests of prospective students. The following insights are taken from our North Asia report. In Q1 2022, the UK dominated the share of search in North Asia, followed by Canada and US. Australia's share in North Asia notably increased during the first quarter, unlike our Northern Hemisphere competitors. The biggest growth came from China, up 32% compared to the same time in 2021, and Hong Kong. Interest among Chinese students continues to grow in business and management, computer science and IT, engineering and technology, in particular in cybersecurity, accounting and organisation management and leadership. There was evidence of growth in interest in mixed mode postgraduate courses delivered by Australian universities. The next source I want to share with you is a qualitative piece of research undertaken with prospective students and their parents. And they were located in 4 major Tier 1 cities: Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou and Chengdu. China's Guinea was commissioned by our post to undertake this research. And a big shout out to the Austrade team in China for this initiative. So the most attractive destination for study in order of preference are, number 1, USA. That's considered the best quality with a strong, and was a really strong preference for parents. Number 2, Australia. Bit of a surprise, especially amongst students. We're considered to have good quality education and our access is seen as an advantage and proximity is a preference. And then number 3 was the UK. Again, good quality education. And in fact, UK was number 2 for parents. And we're considered, UK is considered safer than the US and quicker to gain qualifications. And number 4 is Canada. Just moving on this research. So thinking about the country and the ranking of education in those countries. So parents, they believe USA is number 1. So the US is really quite dominant with parents. And then there's a really tight cluster of the remaining 4, which includes Western Europe, number 2, UK, number 3, Canada, number 4, and Australia, a very close 5. Now, 0.1 separates those 4, so they're very closely clustered. With students, they rate UK number 1, and it's a strong first choice or rating. But Australia equally is a really strong second. And again, note that this is with students. And then Western Europe and Canada. Australia ranks really well overall, up there with Western European countries, but slightly behind the traditional destinations of the US and the UK. However, as far as students are concerned, Australia would be their second choice, indicating that they are not bound by those traditional destinations, perhaps their parents are. And then when thinking about what influences destination decisions, for parents, their key concerns are gun violence, geopolitical tensions, and overseas COVID policies. But for students, their key concerns are overseas COVID policies, domestic COVID policies, and geopolitical tensions. So COVID is clearly the biggest potential roadblock. However, geopolitical tensions are the biggest single concern. And while domestic COVID policies remain uncertain and changeable, overseas study is seen as an attractive option. Our post, for example, reports increased interest in schools education in Australia. In terms of the attributes most commonly associated with Australia, parents think of us as green, eco-friendly, with natural beauty, a good study destination, good universities, and they think of wildlife and so on. For students, it's our natural beauty. We consider it again a good study destination. Wildlife is important. We're considered green and eco-friendly, good healthcare, a laid-back lifestyle and sustainability. 3 of the top 5 associations are related to environment: natural beauty, green, eco-friendly and wildlife. When searching for imagery, most commonly associated with Australia on media, pure nature is important. The notion that students can go out in public without having to wear a face mask, check the pollution index or worry about air quality is very attractive. In terms of the advantages of Australia, it's interesting to note that hard advantages such as better quality education, safety, visa policies resonate more with parents, while soft or indirect advantages such as better natural environment, accepting of Chinese students, Aussie lifestyle resonate with students. So on the flip side, however, geopolitical tensions and costs of living are seen as Australia's greatest disadvantages. So what does this all mean? So on the whole, we remain confident that in the medium term, we can expect a strong recovery from China. The final insights I will share are from our social media listening. These 2 key issues stand out. Currently, cost of living is a major concern. Many students are struggling with the rising costs and impacts on the affordability of accommodation and basic necessities. In response, I'm pleased to advise that Austrade will shortly release our cost of living resources, including a cost of living calculator, housed on the Study Australia website. and not before time either, I've got to say. Prospective students are also researching the job market and the hiring criteria before deciding on a study destination, and they are evaluating the potential return on investment before making a choice. So although Chinese students have tended to put part-time work as a low priority during their studies in Australia, as the employment market at home tightens, with urban youth unemployment reaching record heights, more students may seek to take advantage of post-study work rights. Students who have had exposure to the Australian workplace, particularly in areas related to their field of study, have greater success in the employment market on graduation. According to Angela Lehman of the Ligon Group, returning international students returning home to China are competing with local graduates fiercely for available positions, and approximately 60% claim that their salaries are below their expectations. So Austrade recognises the importance of graduate employment outcomes and has built a suite of digital services and resources that students can access via the Employability Hub on the Study Australia website. The Hub provides students and graduates with information and resources on job seeking, internships, volunteering, and even virtual networking, as well as workplace rights and protections. Our Career Matcher tool enables students to identify their potential careers, their future careers, and related fields of study at any time during their student journey. And the Study Australia Industry Experience Program, a program heavily supported by Study Melbourne and other states and territories, has had over 2,000 students join real, free industry projects in teams comprised of students from a multitude of nationalities, including domestic students, and in a variety of locations, both on and offshore. From this, 90% of students would recommend the program to their peers, 96% plan to include the experience on their CV to enhance their employability. Let me just finish off by just mentioning what Austrade is doing to support the recovery of the international education sector and students studying in Australia. Initially, during COVID, our efforts were all about building confidence and trust in Australia as a destination. We then shifted promoting diverse study options. We added online and transnational education courses to our Course Finder tool on the Study Australia website, and that now is the largest Course Finder tool in the world. And this was to encourage students to start their Australian education from home. Since the announcement of our borders opening, it's all about welcome to Australia, and we have videos, etc. Since July 2021, our campaign activity has delivered 2.4 billion impressions. That's ads looked at, 2.4 billion in just over 12 months. I'm pretty proud of that, and that's globally. Our newest edition includes a range of Study Australia Ready learning modules currently in development. These include Ready to Travel, providing interactive content based on the current online pre-departure checklist. Ready to Live. This has a special focus on accommodation and living arrangements, and then Ready to Learn and Ready to Work. These modules will be redeveloped with additional modules planned to support students throughout their student journey. The partner portal hosted on the Study Australia website supports education agents. In December 2021, Austrade hosted the inaugural Agent Week, aimed at informing and supporting the global network of education agents. We intend to repeat this annually, and we'll have half-yearly check-ins. The next is scheduled for August 25. Feel free to join. Just go onto the Study Australia website. And I'm pleased to advise that the Study Australia website is getting an overhaul. Yes, not a moment too soon. This will include an in-language web presence in China and coordinated social media outreach. Hooray. And finally, just to finish off how we support you, all opportunities gathered in a market, any market, are made available to you through our market information package, with highlights noted in the MIP weekly newsletter. We call it MIP. Note that there are some upgrades also occurring to the MIP, and I apologise in advance because it's going to cause some pain for you, but I do believe, and I'm committed to longer term gain. I hope, fingers crossed, that we will actually be able to invest in significant data and insights services. So just stay tuned for that. I can't confirm anything, but I'm confident. I mentioned earlier that the series of lead indicator reports, I made reference to those. These offer an opportunity to act on real-time insights from prospective student search behaviour. So we want this to inform your commercial decision making. A calendar of Austrade-led and supported events and activities for the next financial year, or this financial year, is also about to be released. These include regular market briefings via sector webinars, which will be led by our offshore trade commissioners and business development managers. So stay tuned. Australia's New Nation brand was formally launched on February 2022 with more than 300 free marketing resources for you to use. The New Study Australia Marketing Toolkit provides an online creative asset library as well as dedicated education images and videos, social media tiles and campaign collateral, all available for you. So thank you for your indulgence. I appreciate that. And over to you on KIP. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for your very rich and a trough of update information. Leave much for us to think about. And the next speaker is Mr. Phil Honeywood, our old friend and real expert on this. He's the CEO of the International Education Association of Australia. Phil.
Okay, well, look, thank you to my good friend on KIT, and also I should mention that Melissa Banks was my immediate predecessor, national president of my association, so great to be on a stage, sharing a stage with Melissa as well. Ladies and gentlemen, so I've only got 3 slides from memory. I'm just trying to, actually, we're going backwards here, I think. Go down, thank you. Great. There we go, thank you, good. So I wanted to sort of start on a positive note. And many of you may have actually seen the media a couple of days ago that we've now got a record number of student visa applications for any month in the past 10 years at 43,000. Applications are one thing, conversions another, as many of us know. And obviously, as a former politician and minister in this state, I can be full and frank about some of the issues that I regard as really important that we get a handle on. For example, with my taxi driver interviews to and from Melbourne Airport, I was talking to a young Turkish Uber driver the other day, and I said, "Why did you come to Australia to study?" And he said, "Because you're cheap." He said the Australian dollar was cheap, my tuition fees were cheap, I came to Australia because of that. Then, of course, time's going to tell the extent to which we're going to find with uncapped work rights at the moment, which is just a crazy situation we have to fix. You know, to be a full-time student in Australia, you can now work 140 hours a week or more in 3 or 4 different part-time jobs while you're supposedly studying full-time. And a number of education providers tell me that that's just become a total nonsense where students aren't turning up to lectures because from certain countries, particularly Nepal and India, currently our top markets, you've got mum and dad back home saying, look, COVID's really affected the family business. You can earn Australian dollars. Don't worry about study so much, but send them back money back home. So happily, these situations don't seem to happen anywhere near as much in the China market. The vast majority of Chinese students want to come to a country like Australia to get an outstanding education quality, but also to Melissa's points about lifestyle and so on. And I also know that my good friend Gary Lee here, supported by Lucas, the co-chairman of our IEAA Victorian Young Professionals, and they're doing a great job as an example of trying to get more school students to study here as well, because just a key bit of data for your information. The Kiwis at the moment are suffering incredible strain compared to us. The Kiwis across the Tasman, prior to COVID, had 135,000 full fee paying international students, proportionately higher than in Australia to their population. 20% of the New Zealand overseas students are enrolled usually in the school system. Who can tell me what it is? Global Victoria, I'm allowed to answer. Who can tell me what the proportion is in Australia?
3.
Well done, 3%, exactly. So if there's any scope whatsoever to improve our market share, it's got to be in the school sector. But what happens? Our Victorian certificate of education competes against the South Australian certificate, competes against the Western Australian certificate. So when the New Zealanders go abroad to promote their school education, they've got 1 year, 11 year, 12 curriculum to promote. We compete against one another. There's no Australian certificate of education, so we shoot ourselves in the foot yet again. And of course, we all know, ladies and gentlemen, that if you get the young people while they're young, they'll get far better integrated into our culture, into our lifestyle, and they're also going to assist our social licence to operate with the wider Australian community, because they're playing in the playground, they're doing sports with Aussie kids, and then when they go into post-secondary, they're much more understood and they understand us better. So good news on that June figure of 43,000, but unfortunately, the former coalition government on the way out the door took a large amount of money out of the Home Affairs Department visa processing budget, not just for student visas, but for working holidays, etc. And that combined with COVID, we've had Shanghai closed down for 12 weeks, so I think at one stage, Hong Kong 3 months as well, Colombian students having their student visas processed out of our Australian embassy in Vietnam. Now try getting a Vietnamese local person to understand that Latin American young people try before they buy. They'll often enrol to do 10 weeks or 20 weeks English and think, I'll see what Australia's like, and then I might stay on and get an extension to my visa. The Vietnamese embassy official won't necessarily understand that that's a cultural issue in Latin America, whereas in Vietnam, they'll enrol or apply for a student visa for post-secondary, etc. straight away. So lots of different issues there. In the China market, though, of course, there is this other problem of a dichotomy, and that is that we've had an incredible appetite for online learning. And it's become a real group of 8 university issue in Australia compared to other universities. And it's also causing a lot of problems within our universities. So, for example, one group of 8 universities in Sydney have told me that their academics are fed up teaching online to students offshore, and they want all Chinese students back for semester 1 next year. But another group of 8 university around the corner in that same city, I'm trying not to name them here, is quite happy to continue teaching online going forward. So to Melissa's point about Chinese students want to come to Australia, there is a cohort that we now have to understand and really, I guess, differentiate and look at other ways in which to excite interest, who may want to continue studying in online mode for some time to come. And do we acknowledge that and do we enhance it, or do we say, oh, it's just a temporary COVID measure and we'll get over it and they'll come here anyway? And I think we need to address that as a study destination country compared to our competitors. So obviously there we've got that group of 8 situation, my second dot point. I met with the Chinese embassy on the 27th of April at their request. Normally I'd go to the embassy compound, but we had a very nice lunch in Kingston, and it was with Minister Wang, the Deputy Ambassador, and Education Councillor Kerr, and the new Education Councillor who's come from Germany, Madame Gao. The whole reason for the lunch was to tell me that the Chinese government want international students back in Australia. The Chinese government have never liked online learning so much for certain reasons, and they are very keen, they said, to get their students back into Australia. So I think that was really important. I mean, that was the fundamental message they wanted to impart to me. And then, of course, for all the right reasons, whatever, the new government has got a better relationship with China for the time being. I wouldn't want to be Prime Minister Albanese walking that interesting tightrope, but so far so good. I think we'd all agree that there's a better prospect with ministerial to ministerial level meetings having happened already, a better prospect for the relationship to be better going forward. I want to mention Haileybury because when Melissa was president of IEAA, on our board we had Derek Scott, the principal of Haileybury, and Haileybury done a fantastic job. This is one example. There may be other people in this room who are also doing great things in the school sector, but Haileybury's got, I think, 4 partner schools in China now. And Derek Scott and Haileybury and other schools can prove the data that shows that a Chinese student, or Vietnamese student even, who does the VCE in China or the IB is more than likely to enrol then in a university here in Australia, and often Monash or whatever. So it's really important that we understand that pathway. Okay, all things political now. So we've got the Jobs and Skills Summit on the 1st of September, and my association is really seeking a recommendation to come out of that summit for clearer migration pathways for overseas students. At the moment, it's a dog's breakfast. And you know, one of the good things the previous coalition government did was they extended the duration of post-study work right visas. And again, we talk of Australia as one country, but state governments can and do make a difference. So, for example, the South Australian government have a policy of live, learn and stay. So if you can prove, God forbid, that you've lived in Adelaide or Port Augusta, wonderful spot, for 7 years, that you've studied, worked, lived in South Australia for 7 years, you are pretty much guaranteed of a state-sponsored migration place. And how does that make a difference? Well, for example, the latest student enrolment data shows that WA, with more than twice the population of South Australia, massive, much bigger economy than South Australia, WA has less than half the international students enrolled than what South Australia does. So it just goes to show that a state economy can punch above its weight when it comes to involvement and marketing and attraction. Now, I sit on the Study New South Wales board, I sit on the Study Queensland board, I sit on the Study Perth board. So I get a great insight into what the different states are doing. There's no doubt that Mark McGowan's 3 different policy backflips in Western Australia with the border opening really made many students suffer, and many students who had arrived at Australia waiting to cross into enrolment at WA institutions, many of them then just gave up and they enrolled in New South Wales Victorian institutions, and the data will come out on that. Unfortunately, because of the lack of direct flights, there's another situation. Queensland, their market share's gone backwards and they're down to 14%. But New South Wales, for a whole range of reasons, including direct flights, is taken market share off other states and is now at 40%. So now this depends partly on different nationalities as well, but China is number 1, of course, for New South Wales, whereas in Victoria, India's been number 1 for many years. So what are we doing? So I've met with the new Education Minister, Jason Clare, on the 5th of July. He asked me to provide him with a briefing paper of 6 priority issues. My good friend Julian Hill MP, who was employed here in the state of Victoria running international education. Julian Hill met last night with Minister Clare in Parliament, handed over my priority paper to him, and we're looking at a governance situation in which a federal government MP will either become co-convener with me of the National Council for International Education, or will become convener and I'll become deputy convener. And that will give us some really good direct link to government from having a government MP on that council, and I think we'd all agree that's a great idea. And of course, the great thing is that that National Council, they're all volunteers, so it's not an office of profit under the Crown, so we can have an MP without causing any media brouhaha. And also, Melissa's Minister, Don Farrell, is hosting a visitor economy task force meeting at Parliament this Friday, which I will be represented at. And it's really crucial to mention there, with all the good information and the hard work Melissa's team have been doing, is that, of course, friends and family of international students make up, what, Melissa, over 1/3 of international tourists who come to Australia traditionally.
68% of international expenditure.
68%. That's a better thing than 1/3 of visitors. Okay, they spend more money when they're here, basically. And so it's good that the Trade Minister is also getting involved as well. And the other bit of good news is that Julian informed me yesterday that the IEAA official parliamentary friendship group for international education is being revived. After each federal election, there has to be new friendship group formed. Julian will continue as a co-chair, and there's always a opposition MP as co-chair. So Zoe McKenzie, the new federal member for Greg Hunt's seat, help me out, what's the name of that seat? Zoe McKenzie, who was the Chief of Staff to the former Trade Minister, Andrew Robb. Zoe will become the co-chair with Julian Hill of that parliamentary friendship group, and we'll be having a big cocktail event early in the new year that IEA will host at Parliament. Okay, room for improvement. And this is my last slide. It's where I kind of cut to the chase. So year to date, May 2022, Chinese student enrolments minus 16.5%, commencements are minus 22.6%, and ELICOS is down by 34.2%. So, clearly our number one market, we need to breathe new life into it. Melissa's given the good news there that they love us, they want us, they need us. But as I said, we've got that dichotomy that's carrying on for a bit at the moment with online study, with lockdowns, which we'll hear about, I'm sure, in a moment. And of course, I guess Omicron hesitancy. If you've got an only child in a Chinese family, are you going to be comfortable as mum and dad sending your child off, whether it's Canada, UK, Australia, where Omicron's seen to be running rampant, so to speak. So in a COVID zero policy country, again, there'll be that hesitancy issue as well. Obviously, I've already mentioned the need for a holistic approach to student enrolments. I should also mention industry accreditation bodies as barriers to entry. So the national president of the Council of International Students, who I'll be meeting with in Adelaide tonight, he quite rightly has argued at national fora that international students, if they have a mental health issue, which so many of them have had during COVID, find it almost impossible to access a culturally understanding or interculturally competent psychologist or mental health advisor in Australia. And one of the reasons for that is that we've made it just so difficult for psychologists who come from non-English speaking backgrounds to get qualified with fieldwork issues, etc. So, if you're a Chinese student or an Indonesian student or another nationality, and you've got particular issues and particular cultural matters that you want a professional counsellor to understand, if you're sitting opposite a white Anglo-Saxon male or female who hasn't had any intercultural competency training, that's a big issue. And I think, again, if we're going to attract students, some of these things really need to be better understood. There's lots of motivations as to why a young person comes to another country. Sure, it might be the environment, it might be the Turkish student wanting a cheap course, but it might be to explore their sexuality, etc. And they've got the right to access appropriately culturally sensitive services. So industry accreditation bodies have got a big role to play, but they act so often as a barrier. The very simple fact that Australia is going to have a shortage of nurses in the order of over 30,000 nurses are going to be a shortage here in this country by about 2030, and yet the AMAC, the industry body, increased the IELTS English language minimum level to IELTS 7 for entry as an enrolled nurse. Overnight, that changed the whole student source country profile. Overnight, we lost Koreans, Japanese, so many other countries, and it became a Filipino market. So we've really got to get our act together there in having some common sense approaches. You can graduate as an engineer in Australia with IELTS 6.5, but you can't enter and start a lower level nursing qualification, enrolled nursing, without IELTS 7 equivalent. I mean, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot yet again in getting great, motivated young people who make great aged care workers, great nurses. My final point is because I've been asked to talk about state and federal, and I've given a hard time to the federal government in the media. Many of you have seen what I've done there in terms of the previous coalition government, how they let the side down. They did damage to our reputation as a caring and welcoming study destination country compared to other countries. But I do, and my friends from Global Victoria know, this is a soapbox, but I'll say it again, we are the only state in Australia not to have an international education strategy. We haven't had one for 2 years. I know one's coming. It might even be very soon. But I have to call that out because we used to be the state that governed international education the best, I reckon, in the world, if not Australia. We had two fantastic Labor ministers in Stephen Herbert and in Phil Dalidakis, and they were passionate about international education. We then dropped the ball. I won't ascribe blame for that, but certainly not the Global Victoria team. And so when I sit on the Study Queensland board, the Minister for Industry and Trade hands-on chairs the meetings of that advisory council. And he comes back to each meeting with, and before, it's been Kate Jones before that and Jackie Trabb before that, and they come back with action points and follow-ups as to what we need to do. So, it's a great example of leadership from the top. In Study Perth Board, we had the Education Minister comes to every Study Perth Board meeting and again takes action points away and comes back as well. Here in Victoria, we have finally breathed new life into an advisory council. I think John Brumby is chairing that. I know my good friend Celina is on it. But for 2 years, we haven't had a state strategy. And yet it's our number one industry, and every other state, including Tasmania and Northern Territory, have got an international education strategy. So I just say we need to accept that we do a lot of great things in the state. We need to accept that we've got the largest number of education counsellors. We've thrown the most money at this industry for all the right reasons and wonderful student welfare support. But governance from the top down has got to be an important issue. And I just hope that we can improve on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Phil, for sharing your deep insight and knowledge about what's happening in the policy government area. And our next speaker is Fred Stevens. He is Victorian Government Commissioner for Greater China, and he had got a very extensive and deep experience and knowledge about the market, and he's now sharing his thoughts. Brett.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Melissa, Phil, always, and Celina, of course. It's always bloody hard following industry experts in this space. So today, what I'm going to be doing is, firstly, trying to work out how to get the next slide up there. There we go. I'm going to give a presentation. I've got a few slides I want to go through, a little bit of, just some information around what's happening. And I suspect we might get a little bit more value out of a Q&A session afterwards. So I want to keep it a little bit short and sharp, and we'll see how we go from there. All right. Let me give you just a quick overview of the Victorian Government, our VGTI network, and what it is that we're doing internationally and obviously in China. So the VGTI network across the globe, we have 23 offices, we've got over 100 staff. We split the world into different regions, and my role is as Commissioner to Greater China, which actually includes a few other places that are on this map. But let's just talk specifically what's on this map here at the moment. So within the China footprint, we have offices in Beijing, Nanjing, Shanghai, Chengdu, and Hong Kong. Across that network, we have about 25 staff, and 5 of them are in the education space. Now, our 2 education services managers, Li Chen and Terry Wang, who I hope you all met at some stage over the journey, their role, and they're based in Beijing and Chengdu, their role is absolutely focused on promoting Victoria as a study destination for Chinese international students and to facilitate collaborations between Victorian education providers and partners in China. Now, additionally, we also have Victoria's Department of Education and Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority has a school education services manager, which is Maple Fu, who looks after all of our VCE offshore programs and promotes all of our Victorian government schools. And in March 2021, we launched our first study Melbourne hub in Shanghai, which I'll elaborate on a little bit more. Now, since the pandemic began in 2020, the Victorian government has committed more than $180 million in targeted support for Victoria's international education sector and its students. In December 2021, we released the $33.4 million International Education Short-Term Recovery Plan, and outlining a set of initiatives to stabilise the sector and position it for recovery. We have a further $50 million over 4 years for the International Education Recovery and Growth, which was announced in the 21-22 budget. And right now, the Victorian government is currently finalising its new longer-term international strategy International Education Recovery Plan, which will be released in the next coming months. And Phil, to respond, I get it, but we'd rather have the right strategy than just any strategy. So 2 years late, but 2 years worth of reaction and being able to get the right one in place. Now, part of this is also 5 study Melbourne hubs, which we've put up, and they're an important initiative of Victoria's recovery plan and commitment. The Shanghai hub, which was the first to be established and has supported international students in China to engage with Victoria and their education institution in meaningful ways, as well as being able to connect with each other in a social and academic community. It's been running successfully for over a year now. We've had over 2,000 student visits. We've conducted 50 plus events with over 1,500 participants coming along. Now, the hub is uniquely designed. It's a multi-purpose space. We've got areas where students can come in, they can just simply study, they can participate in a whole range of different activities that the universities are running, that agents are running, that basically anyone who has a connection with our education industry is able to come and participate here. The interesting thing that I've found from it is that students are coming in and using the space, and they're studying. Look, honestly, some of them are probably just watching movies and reading books, but it doesn't really matter because they're actually getting an opportunity to come and engage and feel connected with the university and the lifestyle that they were hoping to achieve if they were here in Melbourne. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is just help people remain connected. Now, in the Study Melbourne Hub, we've also been running a whole range of virtual programs as well, because, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, there's been a few lockdown issues in China over the last 12 months. Most recently, Shanghai, I was there, and 87 days being locked inside your house it's a decent time. You know, you do get to know how big your walls are and how many doors there are and that sort of stuff. Honestly, I'm not. Well, you know what? Yeah, that is correct. And I had a little bit of that. But the difference here is that at least you're able to still go to a supermarket. You could go outside for exercise. You weren't allowed to engage with family and friends, but Shanghai was a little bit more restrictive. So now I've lost my train of thought here. Okay, right. Let's get back into this. So we've done so we're talking about the virtual engagement. Now, the hub's actually put together a virtual program as a way of expanding our outreach across China. So not just about Shanghai, where our study hub is, but how do we engage with all of our students across the country? That has been a positive from COVID. Virtual engagement now, online engagement, is no longer this really tricky, how do we get the buy-in from the students? That's gone really well. And it also includes a new program that we're running, which is our Everyday Heroes series, where students can learn more about life as an international student in Melbourne. Now, our ESMs, Chen and Terry, who are on the ground, have been actively engaging with local stakeholders to explore new opportunities and facilitate sustainable and resilient recovery for the sector. And despite all the challenges brought about by the pandemic, the team continues to see success, forging new articulation programs for Victorian universities, promoting online teacher training products, developing new VCE offshore programs, and building the Study Melbourne brand across the country. Now, these are achievements shared with our education providers, especially their in-country representatives, and the learning centres that have been set up by a number of Victorian universities in China. The Team Victoria is well recognised by our partners on the ground, and it's a direct result of the restrictions in travel. In the past, I'm looking around the room at the moment, half this room would have been in China, every month, if not more in some instances. But that's been basically impossible to do over the last 2 years. So we've been working really closely with those people on the ground, and fortunately, I've been one of them as well. So it's been great to actually get that frontline knowledge and reaction of how things are happening. Now, there's a photo here that you'll see that we've, part of another activation event that we've been running at the hub. So we've also been, which I think we've got what do we got up there? We've got the Study Melbourne. We ran a fashion festival event, which coincided with the fashion festival here. And then most recently, we participated and we brought, I think it was 150 Chinese international students to the basketball game. Just down here. In fact, I had Minister Wang as my guest, and he was when he's on TV, he has a particular persona. In person, he's a great guy, and we had a really good chat. And I agree with you. He absolutely is. He wants that engagement. But we brought a heap of students to the basketball, and that was great. That was watching Australia play China in the FIBA qualifying round. Now, impacted by the pandemic, we've also seen recruitment numbers dropping over the past 3 years. Now, however, China remains the #1 source market for Victoria. And as you can see from the chart of student visa holders for Victoria, we now have 55% of our Chinese student visa holders back here onshore, which is vastly different to other nationalities and highlights the importance of our student support, such as through the Study Melbourne Hub in Shanghai. Now, this graph shows that in early 2022, China overtook India as Victoria's largest cohort of onshore international students. Now, China has not held this position since July 2020, and it is a promising sign of recovery. And I think Melissa's graphs really highlighted that, and Phil's comments as well. We looked at this and we were trying to work out, is this just a spike related with perhaps flight availability? But we do think this is a trend now, and we're seeing a great, well, it's a positive outlook going forward. Now, there has been quite a few changes in China, from the slowing economic growth to reform in the education across schools. And I'm not going to go into a whole heap of detail here, but I do want to highlight the opportunities for Victorian providers that stem from these challenges. And we're seeing a go younger approach and a trend of studying abroad in China due to the parental perceptions that China's school reforms are narrowing the students' paths to higher quality education. Now, to tap into this student path pipeline, our team in China have enhanced agent and school engagements to promote the Study Melbourne and Victorian higher education. Now, I encourage all of you to reach out to Chen and Terry, and obviously the GB Global Study Melbourne team here in Victoria as well. Because essentially, without everyone here and online, we're operating independently and not always at a collaborative level. Now, I'm really fortunate because I know my team in China work incredibly closely with Andrew and his team in China with Austrade. And I take Phil's point as well, is that there is differences between the states, of course, but the interesting thing from a Victorian perspective is that we don't see the other states as our competitors. We are sufficiently confident that our competitors are the US, they're Canada, they're the UK. We tend to step up a little bit in that space. Now, during the pandemic, the Chinese students and institutions have adapted to online teaching quickly, and demand for this delivery model is likely to continue, especially in adult education and industry training. A blended model working with overseas trainers continues to be favoured by local institutions. There is still a strong demand for offshore delivery in China, especially establishing joint institutes, and our ESMs are exploring new articulation partnerships which could potentially lead to more joint institutional level arrangements in the future. In the vocational education sector, Chinese vocational colleges are being provided significant government resources to upgrade their curriculum and teaching quality. Our TAFEs have been running capacity building programs for overseas partners for over the past decades, and this has positioned Victoria well to take advantage of these opportunities, especially over our competitors such as the UK, Canada, and especially Germany. Now, ESMs will run several seminars in China to promote Victorian TAFE capacity building programs and TAFE Victoria's new micro-credentials, and we look forward to working closely with all of our TAFEs on this. And we're also supporting a whole range of different research partnerships with academia and industry, particularly in Sichuan, because we're seeing a lot of growth in that Sichuan in the Western China manufacturing sector, where there's, they're looking for foreign direct investment from European countries and US companies especially, but those businesses are wanting to know where's the workforce coming from. It's not about just, okay, there's 10 million workers. They need the right workers going in there, and the vocational training that Victorian companies are providing is giving that comfort. All right, so what's the market sentiment towards Australia and Victoria? Overall, it is optimistic. And even though we've seen a drop in recruitment numbers, that picture does not really capture several important wins that are reflected in our more recent data sets. Firstly, according to the Navitas recent Agent Perception Survey in July, 54% of agents in Greater China agree that there is an increased interest in Australia in the past 2 months. I know the China Skinny guys when they were doing that research as well. I think the internet just about broke in the first 3 weeks of Shanghai's lockdown. Every single person was looking at different options. So it's not surprising to see that that's kicked up a little bit. Secondly, Victoria's Department of Education has shared that the application for its international student program at government schools has risen 40% in comparison to last year. I mentioned before that 55% of Chinese student visa holders are back in Victoria now, and we do expect to see more students coming back once China increases international flights. COVID zero policy that is in place in China is unlikely to be changing in the immediate future, especially as we work towards the end of the year with some pretty major political activities that will be held in China. And right now, the single biggest challenge we have is that the policy means that there is only one flight per week per destination. And I'm standing here in front of you as a direct result of what happens when there's a COVID case on the return flight. They cancel the flight for 1 month, and you then have to try and get around. Now, I was just talking to James before. James has just found out that if you do want to get to China, you can, but it's going to cost you probably a kidney and half of your house mortgage at the moment to jump on that flight, because everyone else is trying to get on that same flight. Now, in addition, we've got, this is probably the most interesting one here at the moment, is that, actually it's not true, it's still interesting. This is just an interesting point. So in addition, with 10.76 million university graduates this year, China is facing great employment pressure. For context, the number of students applying for postgraduate exams this year reached a record high of 4.57 million, meaning that about 3 million students will fail to secure a place domestically. Now, the increased competition domestically could mean increased consideration is given to international education. If you can't get in back home, what are you going to do? You're going to have to look at other places. Now, China's COVID policies are changing, and we expect to see the quarantine time for overseas travellers further shortened and more international flights resumed at some stage. I'm not going to sit in front of you at the moment and give you any predictions, because I hope that we will see a bit of a shift in this policy, possibly in December, maybe January next year. But if I had 6 crystal balls, I would literally give you 6 different answers on this at the moment. But we're doing the classic. We're hoping for the best and we're planning for the worst, and we'll keep everyone updated. And the good thing about this is that because of our footprint that we have in China as well, it allows us to be a little bit more creative in the way that we join the dots. So obviously we talk to universities and we're talking to all of their education partners in China. But the good thing is, when we're trying to work out what's happening with flights, we also work directly with China Southern, with China Eastern, with Xiamen Airlines, with Sichuan Airlines. When those guys start coming to us and saying, hey, we'd like to run some more marketing and promotional campaigns, that's a little bit of a precursor that they're expecting to see that the flights are coming up. Now, we haven't seen that yet, but we're expecting, as soon as that happens, that'll give us a lead time of probably a 6 to 8 week lead time that allows us to go, oh, okay, if these guys are ramping up their flights, that means we can start to look at other ways of connecting at an education level as well. Now, the Navitas survey also showed that Australia is well positioned to win the market back for its high vaccination rate, COVID-safe protocols and flexible delivery. Before I go on to the next slide, I'm going to pick up on something that Phil said as well. Absolutely, there is, what did you say? Omicron hesitancy. Absolutely. Let's be brutally honest here, is that I've come back to Victoria at the moment. You've all got COVID. You're driving me crazy. It's like, I've come from, hard lockdown where there's, a case, we saw 10 cases in Shanghai. 26 million people got locked inside for almost 3 months. I come here, there's 15,000 people a day with COVID. The beauty of that is that it's well managed. We're seeing that this is actually an absolutely a disease that we can actually work with. But as a parent, if you've basically been told that you get COVID and it's like the end of the world, there's a lot of people incredibly hesitant to send off their children, not just to Australia, but to the UK, to the US, to Europe, where it's a lot worse than what it is in Australia at the moment. So this is something that we definitely need to consider when we're talking about what's driving student return and what's actually bringing students back into the marketplace. All right, now, as I finish up, I just want to reiterate, and it's such a government thing to say, but the VGTI, China, we're here to help. Make sure you reach out. Make sure you're talking to Chen, you're talking to Terry, you're talking to the GV team here. I'm available for, hopefully at this point, only another week or so before I can get back to China. But my contact details are there, and I'll stop now because I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett, for your very detailed analysis of the Victorian, particularly from Victorian perspective, which is what ACBC Victoria would like to really emphasize. And the next speaker is Celina Yu. She is the CEO of Global Business College of Australia and Advantage Institute of Australia. I'd like to add that both Celina and me were originally international students of a different generation, of course. So we do have a lot of experience in ourselves being a student in years gone by, and both involved in still different organizations in terms of global engagement, international student market. So I'll hear what Celina has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankit. Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to join this expert panel on these timely and important discussions today. My name is Celina Yu. I'm the Managing Director of GBCA and IEAA. We are a subsidiary of Hong Kong-listed company Advantage Group, and we have covered all students' learning circle with more than 77,000 students. And our campus mainly in Guangzhou, and we have another campus in Sichuan with more than 20,000 students in beautiful Chengdu. And GBC and IEAA are the subsidiary, are the first overseas campus of the group established in 2014. And we are very happy we chose Melbourne as the destination because we can see a lot of support from Study Melbourne and from Victoria government, especially throughout this COVID period. Our students have a lot of receive a lot of feedback and support from the government, especially students using the Shanghai hub. They feel really warm and engaging with their international peers in China. We offer vocational and higher education qualifications across different disciplines. So today I'd like to, I'm conscious of time, will make my speech very short. So today I will talk about some relevant data on Chinese students' desire for getting an Australian education. Then I want to talk about 3 issues, which also pointed out heavily by our speakers today. That is how certain transnational education initiative can help build current and future students. Some key data to show for the opportunities for Australian postgraduate studies as highlighted by Melissa, and also the importance of having effective programs to enhance students' employability. So this is a very, very important topic at this moment because, as you know, most of Chinese students will return to China after they study here. So the employability of them, not only in Australia, but also in China, are very relevant for the post-pandemic. We have heard a lot of very positive market feedback and surveys from our previous speakers. So here I would like to highlight two. The data is extracted from a two large-scale survey from more than 50 universities and colleges across China shows that 86% of Chinese students still have an intention to study abroad. This demonstrates that COVID-19 has not reduced their desire to study abroad. And 73% of Chinese students intend to study bachelor or above qualifications. And most of them are equipped with a very high GPAs. There is a less concern in terms of tuition fee, which shows Chinese students' purchasing power is strong, so it's not an obstacle. And also the reputation, academic achievement, and employment perspectives play a very heavy role when they're making decisions at this moment. So these are from a new Oriental 2022 white paper, so which covering a lot of students' current feedback towards international education. And Australia is remain as the third preferred destination for Chinese students, which is aligned with the survey pointed out by Austrade Melissa. And students consider Australia as one of the best country to live and study. And over 50% of students feel confident to the quality of Australian universities. And also the report by British Universities International Liaison Association forecast what global study mobility look like post-pandemic. So China will remain to lead in the first pandemic area. By 2025, it is expected that 1.34 students to leave China to study abroad, whereas 1.1 million in 2019. And China continued to increase its outbound market share from 27% in 2019 to 29% by 2025. And this report also shows the number of Chinese households with income greater than 35K is expected to increase dramatically from 22 million in 2019 to 100 million by 2025, which provide a greater base for families to afford a global education. But during the pandemic, we can see a lot of online hybrid blended delivery modes to support students, so-called stranded students, has been mixed outcomes as highlighted by Phil. It opens the significant opportunities though, so especially in the higher education sector. The challenges, as Phil highlighted, probably is to develop a very effective partnership models and also tailor-made curriculum to the host country and also the regulatory environment, not just Australian Zoom universities, which is important. And GBCA and IEAA fund online learning is an effective way during the entire COVID. We have established 6 close partnerships across country, established 18 articulation pathways. We provided 60 non-award units, organizing more than 80 student and staff events. Well, the overall activities through those modules, we converted 24 students last year into our degree program and 76 students this year to our bachelor and early course programs, which is great outcome. Well, I'm very happy to share that among all the events and the workshops we organized, the most highly participant is Australian wine. So that really shows students love Australian cultural and in terms of understand lifestyle and the culture and the customs. The next opportunity I like to highlight, which is also pointed out by Melissa, is postgraduate opportunities. There are 3.5 million students who are missing out from Chinese master program entry examinations. So these provide a great opportunity for Australian postgraduate providers. So the last one I want to emphasize is employability. I have valued my 2 years experience on Victorian International Education Advisory Council. We have formed immediately after COVID to address and the pressing issues. We come up with a short-term recovery plan and working on different initiatives to addressing a lot of international students' problems and issues. And particularly recently, we're working on enhancing employability outcomes. And Victoria government pay a lot of attention to the link between study and employment for international students. The benefits is actually highlighted by Melissa, so I will not talk about it here. But we actually have very bold vision. So we hope every international students within 6 months of their study, within 6 months of their graduation, they can find a job. So which is really bold, but which is, I think if we can achieve some of it, so it will be very good value proposition for Victoria and for Australia as a whole. So we call for business to join us, to join this initiative. And so we can please contact Study Melbourne as the email underneath. So that is my presentation. Hopefully I provide some insights for you. So I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Celina. And that wraps up our presentation from our key speakers. And given the time constraints, so let's move on straight to the Q&A session. If I can invite all our speakers to come up to the podium here, or there are some chairs. And then what I would suggest for both our audience here and audience online to perhaps raise your hand, or in the digital raising your hand, and then we'll try to pick questions alternatively, one from our in-person venue here and from online. And if you could please keep your question succinct and short, then we can be able to entertain more question and answer from more people attending. So there I see one question over there.
Hello, my name is Charles Chin from Chin Communications. I have one question. Now, we have been talking about focus on China, and a lot of people here are related to China. Now, considering the relationship between China and Australia has been a bit rocky, can we, well, should we actually focus, also diversify our focus to other countries, particularly to Southeast Asia and also subcontinent? Thank you.
Look, we very much are doing that, and in fact in the National Strategy for International Education that I was involved in putting together with the Council, diversity action plans are a strong recommendation. So the previous coalition government wanted to enforce diversity audits where only public universities, not private providers, would have to do annual diversity audits. I think we have to be careful though, because of course when we talk about the Chinese market, the vast majority of Indonesian students who come to Australia are actually ethnic Chinese background. Many Vietnamese, Cambodian students are ethnic Chinese background. So we get a bit confused sometimes about the cultural origins as well of students who come from Southeast Asia, and you know what culture they identify with as well. But one of the biggest bugbears that I have is Africa, is that the UK take tens of thousands of African students every year who have outstanding academic results, the best and the brightest from a whole continent, and yet our Home Affairs Department constantly makes it difficult for African students to get student visas. So that's one diversity issue. Another diversity issue is that we have to move away from the cookie cutter accounting business degrees, because there's just so many other options now that young people want, music degrees, performing arts, and IT in many different areas, artificial intelligence. So I think a good point was made about the micro-credentials, because I think micro-credentials can offer a customised solution that acts as a pipeline or a pathway for students, particularly from Southeast Asian countries that in many cases are still developing their IT. If we can offer some customised micro-credentials and then as a pathway to come and study in Australia for further study, that's probably a clever way to go. And in all of that, I would add my point about nursing, aged care. In Australia, we've got a desperate need for some of those skills, and we've limited ourselves to only recruiting from countries where English language is second language, and that's not helping students from Vietnam and other parts of Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah, so I would just add that it's good for the student experience. Diversity in the classroom really does impact student satisfaction and experience. And as we know, Chinese students tend to stick together in class and out of class. And so diversification is important from that perspective. I would also add that diversification should be viewed as more than just source country, and that we should be thinking about field of education as well as location of study. I've come from a regional centre, and the students have a brilliant time at some of our regional cities and so on, and also, of course, level of study and mode of study. So there's lots of ways of looking at diversification. Did you miss anything?
In addition to that, I think diversification of staff is very key in education providers, because we really want to understand and address for the students from a diverse group to really respond to them and let them feel supported, especially under this difficult period. Brad, you want to say?
Yeah, come on, join in.
Look, I think the diversification term is used pretty widely at the moment. And actually, Charles, as you know, I've got a little bit of background. I spent 7 years in Southeast Asia doing this role before moving to China. So I think that what you're going to find is that our international strategy is not an international China strategy. It's actually an international strategy which will address all of our international markets. It's why we have study hubs in 5 countries around the globe, and that we absolutely see there's obviously leaders and higher percentages of students from certain countries across the globe. But to Phil's point, we need more international students, and we're going to get that from a mix of different countries. And absolutely Southeast Asia will be a focal point for not just education, but for pretty much all industry sectors going forward.
Yeah, I might in fact add to that comments that in terms of diversification, it is also very important for the provider to provide the kind of environment. Just to give you an example, most universities these days don't have anywhere for students to really gather and interact and have fun with each other. It's really difficult. But without that, how can you mix, even simple things like international student meeting and working with domestic students? It's really lacking. I mean, most universities are urban, and there's high rise, and then bus stop, back to the car, home. And this is a big problem for us. Unlike the US, where they have huge campuses with dormitory, that most students stay. We are, even compared to China, everybody stay in the dormitory, so they interact with each other all the time. But here, we don't.
Regional Go regional.
Okay, so any other questions? Oh, yes. Yeah, please, Colin.
My name is Alan from Swinburne. And I got one comment and one question. The comments talking about the Queensland, in the Queensland, basically it's more international there. That's the preference choice to go there. The reason is that the Queensland government put a lot of money to support the industry. So the employment rate is quite high. And a lot of students, particularly from China, they know about it. And then they go there and then they find, after they graduate, they get easy to find a job. So I was in Queensland for 2 years. I saw that what they invest from the government is huge compared with Victorian government. So these are only something I would like to share. And go to another, this question is Celina just mentioned about in China. Basically, a lot of agents already shift their focus to promote postgraduate program rather than undergraduate programs. And yesterday, I also have a Zoom meeting with one of the vice president of the university in China. And I asked him about this question. They also mentioned about this quite similar to what Celina just mentioned about most of the undergraduate students, their parents worry about the tension between two countries. And if they send a student to come over here, and our policy have been changed so quickly, and you never know about 2 years later what will happen. So that is kind of the confidence we cannot give to the parents. And that is the reason why a lot of changes they send their students, that is, they send their kids to UK. The cost of living in UK is much expensive that, compared with Australia, but they still rather send to UK and America. So this is kind of the changes. And in terms of the postgraduate study, including PhD, I asked the same question last time. I remember Professor Tan was there as well. I asked a defect. And in China, we are very strong in advanced manufacturing. Just now, our speaker also talking about cybersecurity. But under the current foreign interference policy, advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, botting, AI, robotics are very sensitive area. So how could we work with China? And this is one of the very important points that we really have to consider.
Is that working? So obviously this is a question from my colleagues from Department of Education, actually. But look, I think your point is well made, and it's certainly an area of increasing importance in Australia, in industry. And so we do need to find a way through all that. And so, yeah, let's just keep trying. There's no policy clarity on that yet. Certainly, Jason Clare, the Minister, has had a look at the new strategy and is carefully reviewing all the approaches towards security and how that impacts students, and in particular research students. And so it's under review, is as much as I know and as much as I can say.
Okay, Colin.
Thanks, I'm not sure if that's on. Okay, to the panel, we've heard about a number of changes in the way higher education might be delivered moving forward, in terms of markets, some passing references to products. But I'm kind of wondering more broadly how the higher education sector, and in particular, I wonder about the private provider sector, where potentially there might be more change to take place. Just what likely changes there will be going forward, at a strategic level.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, I'm on a 12:50 flight to Adelaide, so I'll answer that, my part of that, and then I'll have to make my apologies. I think a lot of governments in Australia don't understand that we need to have an ecosystem when it comes to international education. That, yes, our public universities might account for the majority of international student enrolments, but a healthy international education sector that really can kick goals involves private English language colleges, where students might go to a private English language college or a public one, and then might do a vet diploma at a private college maybe, and then go on to do a degree or master's at a public or a private provider or independent provider. So I know that being on the Study Perf board, that they suffer a lot, as they do in Adelaide a bit, from a lack of good quality and numbers of independent providers, whereas here in Victoria and in New South Wales, there's a healthy, robust ecosystem. And we often forget too that many of our public universities around Australia contract out entire degree delivery to private colleges. I mean, how would Ballarat University have ever survived? I mean, which international students are going to go on, to your point, Melissa, go and live in Ballarat? Excuse me. Plenty, that's good to know. In terms of the attractions of being a big city, obviously means that a private provider does a pathway college for a public university, in that example, Federation Uni now, it's been a massive industry for MIT, for ATMC, for a whole bunch of private providers, and for GBCA with University of Canberra. So I think we need to acknowledge that there are some fantastic quality independent providers, but I think the challenge for them, to Celina's point, is going to be to customise their products, because often they can react more quickly to market changes and be more, shall I say, adept and flexible. All they need, though, is the national regulators, ASCRID and TESCA, to acknowledge that they've got customised products, that the demand is there, because often it takes public institutions a bit longer to, shall we say, catch up with the market. So I'm going to have to run to Adelaide, but that's my 2 bobs worth there.
Well, thank you for all the great comments from our speakers, and I know that Phil has to run to the airport, and because we have already passed our time, so I'm sorry that we can't really entertain more Q&A, because our online will close in a few minutes time. So
happy to take more questions from
me too. Okay, we can keep talking here. So okay.
Just don't turn that off. Just leave it on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. If you're okay, I'm okay. Yes, please.
Whenever a black swan event like COVID comes along, people say, "Oh, T&E is the solution." We did it with the Asian financial crisis, with bird flu, etc., and so forth. But it's a lot more complex than that. Our regulators, both in China and Australia, have very firm and specific views on how online, particularly, T&E should be regulated. We've got, unfortunately, a great deep conservatism in Australian universities, particularly related to taking the risk on T&E, and particularly in China, given the political environment. And thirdly, on the China side, we've got the Chinese government often simply not recognising an online degree for employment purposes. So question to the panel, but perhaps Brett, particularly for you, related to contact with the Chinese government. What can we do that's sensible? And I think Phil recommended in his talk to have a whole look at the policy of online education, which is probably a good thing. But what are the sorts of things that we can do to have very high quality but very flexible transnational education, both academically and commercially?
Okay, I think that the conversations that what we need to do is actually have the conversations, because your comment there about perhaps some of the online courses not being recognised is because they're not aware of it. They're not actually across the actual deliverers or the institutions that are actually working on that. Because for us, absolutely, we look at China, and China's this massive market. But when we're in market, we are just one of several thousand entities that are in this space. So it's the single biggest challenge that we face when we're working through our ESMs and engaging with the various government agencies, as well as the private companies that we're working with as well, is actually getting them to learn more about who we are and what it is that we're doing. So I don't think it's not necessarily a policy issue. It's more about it's almost like a marketing and branding exercise that we need to get out and actually talk to people more, and not just us, but the institutions who are involved with it. And when we do hit issues associated with perhaps a very a regulatory issue around accreditation, that's when we can then talk to our authorities with to try and get that over the line. But it's doesn't really work as a blanket sort of let's just get everything approved and then pick and choose from there.
Well, I think even in future, the Chinese government may not recognize the online learning, but still transnational education through virtual is a very important view to access to broader students. So we open a new market, even it's not part of formal qualification. I think as a non-accredited short-term programs engage with broader students, increase students' experience for another country. So that will be contribute a lot, and it will be play a greater role.
I think the offshore learning centre model was quite innovative of Australian and New Zealand universities, and I'm interested to watch the development of those after COVID zero policy. Let's see how that goes. I've been engaging in China for a long time on transnational education, and I've actually seen shifts in the government, the Ministry of Education in China's recognition of a number of different models, including foreign branch campuses. So I've come from universities that have had foreign branch campuses, and those graduates would return to China and their qualifications initially were not recognised. They are now recognised. So there have been shifts over time, and certainly our analysis of how governments reacted to COVID, and this is not just China specific, but it includes China, was that there had to be some flexibility, and that flexibility was trialled, and in many cases it's actually now going to influence policy going forward, because there certainly have been a lot of learnings out of lockdowns and remote learning and so on, and I don't think they're going to waste the opportunity.
Well, TNE, I think, is quite an interesting topic because there are so many forms of TNE. And I guess my experience with the brick and mortar approach, I think, is risky and expensive. But there are other models that I think we can fully and effectively exploit to help us bring students here. I guess that's ultimately what students want to have an experience studying and learning here. One question from Jennifer.
Thank you. I had a question on graduate employability, actually. I guess wondering if any of you, and especially touching on what Celina mentioned on your last slide, if you could share any insights into discussions with businesses in Victoria and Australia on any kinds of hurdles or challenges that they're facing in terms of hiring local graduates versus international, or is it still now mainly the visa constraints and perhaps cultural fit that's the issue?
I think these issues you identified are actually we discussed in our council. Certainly the visa issue as a perception is a strong obstacles for local firms to hire international students, and also communication skills and intercultural skills and these skills are the obstacles. But we think it's a mindset change. Actually, we ran the industry roundtable recently. The KPMG just had a report on that. They actually employed more than 2,000 graduates from international students. They found these students are great to addressing their urgent issues, which is skill shortage. And these students perform in a very better way to in the workforce.
We've been undertaking an analysis of the outcomes for IT students and their success or otherwise in entering employment in the tech sector. Now, the tech sector needs 260,000 employees by 2025, and they cannot get them domestically. Simply cannot. We cannot produce enough graduates. We can retrain people from other sectors. We can perhaps retrain others who maybe have not got the required skill set. It's still not going to be enough. But at the same time, we're allowing so many international graduates to go home. And so we've got to do more to retain our international graduates. But there's a number of elements to this. International students need to help themselves. They've got to exercise their own agency. And I guess that was one of the key points I hope you kind of got through my point about, it's going to be a tough market for students to go home to as graduates. But equally, it's just as tough here to get a job. So they've got to take advantage of all the services that their providers offer. Participate in internships, do volunteering, move away from your cultural group and really engage with other nationalities and the domestic community. It's so important. But after that, it's just as important that our policies, particularly post-study work rights, is conducive to both employers employing our graduates, because at the moment 2 or 3 years simply isn't long enough. They want them for longer. They're going to invest in them, they're going to train them, but they actually need them for longer. And at the moment, they're actually bringing in more from offshore under the TSS visa than they are actually employing international graduates. It's absolute madness. They don't understand the 485. We've got to do a lot of work with employers. And equally, the policy, the timing, 10 months to get a visa. By the time they've got the visa, they've had to actually resort to low-skilled work because they've got to keep bread on the table. And so they've got to live. And by the time the visa comes through, well, they've lost all their networks and they no longer feel as though they can go back to the university and access employment services. So there's a massive challenge in all of this. Really pay attention to the Jobs and Skills Summit. We're being quite vocal around what we hope will come out of that. But absolutely, we are really advocating for valuing the international graduates that are already here and doing whatever we can to retain them and get them into our sectors.
I'm glad that you actually mentioned that point. Several years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, we had an education forum devoted to that very question, how we can encourage industry, employer to realize the value of employing international students. And that's still a challenge, I think.
It is. It's getting there. Having done the stats and presenting that back to the Tech Council and saying only 6% are getting jobs in your sector, and yet you're coming to us saying we want more workers. So, you've got to do something about this. The engineers are the same. They are absolutely desperate, and they've done their own analysis and come to the same conclusion. International graduates are a real source of talent, and we've just got to help them, and we need policy to also shift with this.
Maybe we have one last question, if there are any. Please make it short and sharp, please.
Hi, I'm Douglas Proctor, PBC Global at Swinburne. I wanted to come back to Phil's comment about ecosystem, because I think there's an ecosystem around China engagement on our campuses, where mostly in universities certainly have a multi-stranded approach to China. It's not just about recruiting students, it's also about teaching in country, as one of the early questions comes, and it's also about research engagement. And what we're seeing at the moment is massive disengagement by our academic staff with the work that they do in China, because it's all become too difficult. And so again, that is a part of our ecosystem that is starting to break. And the word that I have from colleagues such as Alan, who posed a question earlier on, is that the foreign interference legislation and all of the things that tie in with that make it just too hard to engage with China. They're then working somewhere else. That leaves a core group of maybe Chinese nationals employed who are then still engaging with China. So again, I think it's really a comment rather than a question. We need to be alert to this. this? Because that's a broken bit of our ecosystem at the moment around our China engagement.
Well, basically, I think the provider, like university, need to probably reassess their business model, because at the moment it's very traditional business model. This faculty and a gross margin of 50%, they will just take the money and do nothing, basically, to actually nurture that kind of source of income. It's very brutal. I've seen it in my own eyes in 2 universities. It's not a pretty sight. And I don't think they have much change much.
No.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, there's not a lot I can say on that. I mean, obviously, it's a new government, new opportunities. And I think, Jason Clare spoke to the Universities Australia conference at the dinner, and what I heard was very positive. We haven't had a policy position announced, and he's not my minister, but everything that happens in that portfolio really matters to us, and so we watch it carefully. We're quietly optimistic that there's quite a positive view of international education and global engagement. Just more broadly, you saw the first 4 weeks of this government. They did a lot of travel, a lot of international engagement, and I think that was a very clear signal in my view. This is the Melissa Banks view, not the Austrade or Australian government view. But anyone could see that. So I saw that as an incredibly positive message, and really wanting to reset Australia's outlook. And so I think everything's on the table.
And on that note, I'd like to thank all the speakers and participants both here, and if they're still staying online, thank you for your participation. And of course, we also want to thank GBCA for the sponsorship of this event, Celina. And we really had a great discussion today, and all the topic leave much for further thought. And I thank you for your contribution, and it feels it's gone already on the airport. And maybe since I think our CEO Virginia is not able to come here in person, I would like to invite her to speak a few words before we close off today's event. Virginia.
Thanks, Kit, and it's been a very interesting event, and I do sincerely thank our speakers, Melissa, the Honourable Phil Honeywood in his absence. Brett, it's always great to hear you speak. We feel very much part of Global Victoria, so thank you so much. Kit and Celina too for leading our working group, for being our vice presidents at ACBC, and a really inspirational session. I don't know whether you remember back in 2014 when we had number plates saying Victoria Education State, and there was the pledge then from the government saying that it would be more than a word, it would be a rock solid foundation for our economic future, and I think you've really outlined that today. It's encouraging to know that the Chinese government does want the students back. We're certainly looking forward to welcoming them. They're good for our economy, the vibrance of our city, our educational institutions, our hospitality, tourism and property sectors, our workplaces and our international relationships. So they're a vital part of our state. We created our Future Leaders Working Group as a means to connect students, graduates and young professionals. If you're not aware of that networking group, please contact us and we'll certainly link you into that. And also we have our Education and Training Working Group for our ACBC members. So thank you all very much. I think you've outlined some very positive steps that are being taken. ACBC is obviously here to support your work, so we look forward to working with you further. And I do thank you again, and all our participants for staying online. So thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Virginia. Yep, and we hope to see you again in another occasion, or maybe even another forum like this in the near future. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And there are some light refreshments outside for those who are here.